The morning sun cast long shadows across the remote Montana valley as Sarah Chun adjusted the scope on her hunting rifle. At 28, she had spent the better part of a decade perfecting her marksmanship skills, transforming from a city girl who had never held a firearm into one of the most accurate shooters in 3 counties. Her calloused hands moved with practiced precision as she checked the weapon's chamber and confirmed the safety was engaged. Sarah had driven 3 hours from Billings to reach this isolated hunting ground, a stretch of wilderness her grandfather had shown her years before his death. The old man had been a World War II veteran who understood the value of self-reliance and the importance of being prepared for anything life might throw your way. He had taught her that respect for firearms came through understanding them completely, and that true marksmanship was as much about mental discipline as physical skill. The hunting season had officially opened 2 days earlier, and Sarah had taken vacation time from her job as a civil engineer to spend a long weekend in the mountains. She worked for a construction company that built bridges and highways across the state, a career that had taught her to think systematically and solve problems under pressure. Her colleagues often joked that she approached everything in life like an engineering problem, breaking down complex situations into manageable components and finding practical solutions. This particular morning, Sarah had risen before dawn to position herself near a game trail that wound through a grove of aspen trees. She had been tracking a large buck for 2 seasons, studying its patterns and habits with the patience of someone who understood that hunting was more about observation and timing than simply wandering through the woods with a weapon. The deer had proven elusive, but Sarah had learned enough about its behavior to predict where it might appear at first light. As she settled into position behind a fallen log that provided excellent cover and a stable shooting rest, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed since moving to Montana 5 years earlier. She had grown up in San Francisco, the daughter of Chinese immigrants who owned a small restaurant in Chinatown. Her parents had worked 18-hour days to build their business and provide opportunities for their children that they themselves had never enjoyed. They had pushed Sarah to excel academically, and she had responded by earning a full scholarship to study engineering at Stanford University. But something about city life had always felt incomplete to Sarah. She found herself drawn to wide, open spaces and the challenge of living self-sufficiently. After graduating with honors, she had surprised everyone by accepting a job offer in Montana rather than staying in California to work for a prestigious firm. Her parents had been bewildered by this decision, but Sarah had felt an immediate connection to the rugged landscape and the independence it represented. Moving to Montana had meant learning entirely new skills. Sarah had grown up in apartments and condominiums, never owning so much as a houseplant. Suddenly, she found herself living on 5 acres outside town, dealing with well water and septic systems, maintaining a generator for power outages, and learning to split firewood for her wood-burning stove. The learning curve had been steep, but Sarah had approached these challenges with the same methodical determination that had made her successful in school. Her grandfather had visited during her first winter in Montana and had been impressed by how quickly she had adapted to rural life. He had also noticed that she was living alone in an isolated area without any means of protection beyond the baseball bat she kept beside her bed. During that visit, he had introduced her to firearm safety and basic marksmanship. What had begun as practical preparation had evolved into a genuine passion for competitive shooting. Sarah had joined the local rifle club within 6 months of her grandfather's visit and had quickly distinguished herself as a natural marksman. She practiced religiously, spending hours each week at the range working on her technique. Her engineering background served her well in understanding ballistics and the mechanical aspects of different firearms. She learned to reload her own ammunition, adjusting powder charges and bullet weights to achieve maximum accuracy with her rifle. The weapon she carried this morning was a custom-built bolt-action rifle chambered in .308 Winchester. She had worked with a local gunsmith to select every component, from the heavy barrel that provided exceptional accuracy to the precision trigger that broke cleanly at exactly 2.5 pounds of pressure. The rifle was equipped with a high-quality scope that allowed her to make precise shots at distances up to 600 yards. Sarah had practiced with this rifle until she could consistently place 7 shots into a group smaller than a quarter at 100 yards. Competitive shooting had introduced Sarah to a community of people who shared her appreciation for precision and discipline. She had participated in numerous matches over the past 3 years, gradually working her way up from beginner competitions to more advanced events. Her best performance had been at the state championships 6 months earlier, where she had finished second in the women's division despite competing against shooters who had decades more experience. The shooting community had also taught Sarah about situational awareness and personal safety. Many of her fellow competitors were current or retired law enforcement officers and military veterans who understood that the skills developed through marksmanship training could be critically important in real-world situations. They had shared stories about encounters where their training had made the difference between becoming a victim and successfully defending themselves or others. Sarah had initially dismissed such concerns, feeling that her isolated lifestyle and practical nature made her an unlikely target for criminals. Montana's low crime rates and strong cultural emphasis on self-reliance created an environment where people generally looked out for each other. But her more experienced friends had pointed out that remote areas could actually be more dangerous precisely because help was far away and response time for law enforcement were measured in hours rather than minutes. These conversations had motivated Sarah to seek additional training beyond basic marksmanship. She had attended defensive shooting courses that focused on rapid target acquisition and shooting under stress. She had learned to shoot from unconventional positions and to engage multiple targets quickly and accurately. Most importantly, she had trained extensively on the mental aspects of armed self-defense, learning to recognize potential threats and respond appropriately to dangerous situations. As the sun climbed higher above the mountains, Sarah heard movement in the brush ahead of her position. She had been motionless for nearly 2 hours, and her patience appeared to be paying off. Through her scope, she could see branches moving in a pattern that suggested a large animal was working its way along the game trail. She quietly disengaged the safety on her rifle and began to control her breathing in preparation for a shot. But instead of the buck she had been tracking, a man emerged from the tree line approximately 100 yards from her position. Sarah immediately re-engaged the safety and lowered her rifle, puzzled by the appearance of another person in this remote location. The man appeared to be in his 40s, with unkempt hair and clothing that suggested he had been in the wilderness for several days. He was moving erratically, stopping frequently to look around as if searching for something or someone. Sarah remained motionless behind her cover, hoping the stranger would continue on his way without noticing her. She had encountered other hunters occasionally during previous trips, and the standard protocol was to acknowledge each other's presence and then maintain sufficient distance to hunt safely. But something about this man's behavior made her uncomfortable. He seemed agitated and was moving in a purposeful manner that suggested he was not simply passing through the area. After several minutes of observation, Sarah realized that the man was actually working his way in her direction. He had not seen her yet, but his current course would bring him directly to her position within the next few minutes. Sarah considered her options carefully. She could attempt to slip away through the trees behind her, but movement would likely attract his attention. She could call out to announce her presence, but her instincts suggested this might not be wise given his unusual behavior. Instead, Sarah decided to remain in place and wait to see what developed. She quietly checked her rifle to ensure it was ready for immediate use if necessary, though she hoped the situation would resolve itself peacefully. Her grandfather had always taught her that the best way to win a fight was to avoid it entirely, but he had also emphasized the importance of being prepared for situations where avoidance was not possible. As the stranger drew closer, Sarah could see more details of his appearance. His clothing was dirty and torn, suggesting he had been living rough for an extended period. His movements had the jerky quality of someone under the influence of drugs or alcohol, or possibly suffering from mental illness. Most concerning to Sarah was the fact that he appeared to be carrying a large knife on his belt and kept touching it as he walked. When a man was approximately 50 yards away, he suddenly stopped and seemed to focus directly on Sarah's position. She realized with growing alarm that he had spotted either her or some sign of her presence. For a long moment, they stared at each other across the distance. Then, the man smiled in a way that made Sarah's blood run cold and began walking directly toward her with increased urgency. Sarah's engineering training kicked in automatically. She quickly assessed the tactical situation and identified her available options. The man was approaching from slightly uphill, which gave him small advantage in terms of positioning. However, Sarah had excellent cover behind a fallen log and a clear field of fire in all directions. Her rifle was loaded with 7 rounds of premium hunting ammunition, more than sufficient to stop any threat if the situation deteriorated to that point. But Sarah also recognized that using her weapon would be legally and morally justified only if she faced an imminent threat of death or serious bodily harm. The man had not yet made any overtly aggressive moves beyond his unsettling approach. Sarah decided to give him one opportunity to explain his presence and intentions before taking more decisive action. When a stranger was approximately 20 yards away, Sarah called out in a clear, firm voice. She identified herself as an armed hunter and instructed him to stop where he was and explain what he wanted. Her grandfather had taught her that projecting confidence and competence was often the most effective way to deter potential attackers. Predators typically sought easy victims, and someone who demonstrated awareness and preparation might convince them to look elsewhere. The man's response immediately confirmed Sarah's worst fears about his intentions. Instead of stopping and responding to her reasonable request, he laughed in a disturbing manner and continued his approach while making crude comments about what he planned to do to her. His words were sexually explicit and violent, leaving no doubt that he intended to commit serious crimes. Sarah realized that she was facing exactly the type of situation her defensive training had been designed to address. Sarah's heart rate increased, but her mind remained clear and focused. Years of competitive shooting had taught her to perform under pressure, and her engineering background had trained her to think systematically even in stressful situations. She smoothly transitioned from a hunting mindset to a defensive posture, bringing her rifle to bear while seeking whatever tactical advantages the situation might offer. The fallen log that had provided excellent concealment for hunting also created an ideal defensive position. Sarah was able to use it as both cover and a stable shooting rest while maintaining a clear view of the approaching threat. She had trained extensively on shooting from this type of position and was confident in her ability to engage accurately if necessary. As the man continued his advance, Sarah issued a second warning in an even firmer tone. She clearly stated that she was armed and would defend herself if he came any closer. This was both a legal requirement in most jurisdictions and a final attempt to resolve the situation without violence. Her grandfather had emphasized that taking another person's life was something that would stay with her forever, regardless of how justified it might be. But the stranger's response made it clear that he had no intention of heeding her warnings. He actually seemed encouraged by her obvious fear and began to move faster while continuing his stream of violent threats. Sarah realized that she was dealing with someone who was either too impaired or too committed to his criminal intentions to be deterred by warnings or displays of force. When the man reached a distance of approximately 10 yards, Sarah made the crucial decision that would determine the outcome of this encounter. She transitioned from issuing warnings to taking direct defensive action. Her years of training had taught her that once a situation reached this point, hesitation could be fatal. She needed to act decisively and with maximum effectiveness to neutralize the threat as quickly as possible. Sarah brought her rifle to her shoulder in one smooth motion, her muscle memory guiding her through the familiar sequence she had practiced thousands of times. The scope's crosshairs settled naturally on the center of the man's chest as her finger found the trigger. Everything she had learned about breath control, sight alignment, and follow-through came together in preparation for what would be the most important shots of her life. But at the critical moment when Sarah was prepared to fire, the situation took an unexpected turn that would test not just her marksmanship skills, but her physical strength and determination in ways she had never imagined possible. The moment Sarah's finger began to apply pressure to the trigger, the stranger suddenly lunged forward with surprising speed and agility. His erratic behavior had been partially deceptive, masking reflexes that were still sharp despite his apparent impairment. Instead of continuing his steady approach, he covered the remaining distance in two quick bounds that brought him directly into contact with Sarah before she could complete her shot. The impact knocked Sarah backward against the fallen log, disrupting her shooting position and sending her rifle barrel skyward. Her first shot went harmlessly into the air as the man crashed into her defensive position with the full force of his body weight. Sarah found herself pinned partially beneath him, struggling to maintain control of her weapon while being subjected to a barrage of punches and clawing attempts at her face and throat. Sarah's engineering mind automatically began analyzing the physics of their struggle, even as she fought for her life. The man weighed at least 60 pounds more than her 130-pound frame, giving him a significant advantage in terms of raw strength. However, his position was awkward and unstable, and his obvious intoxication was affecting his coordination. Sarah realized that her best hope lay in using technique and leverage to overcome his size advantage. Years of competitive shooting had given Sarah exceptional upper body strength and fine motor control. She had spent countless hours holding heavy rifles steady in challenging positions, developing the kind of functional strength that proved invaluable in a physical confrontation. While the stranger thrashed and grabbed at her, Sarah maintained a death grip on her rifle with both hands, refusing to allow him to wrench it away from her despite his increasingly desperate attempts. The man quickly realized that Sarah was not going to release her weapon voluntarily. His attacks shifted from trying to overpower her completely to focusing specifically on gaining control of the rifle. He wrapped both hands around the barrel and began twisting and pulling with all his strength, trying to break Sarah's grip through sheer force. His actions became more frantic as he realized that his initial assault had not achieved the quick victory he had expected. Sarah felt her hands slipping on the rifle stock as the man's superior weight and leverage began to tell. Her palms were becoming slick with sweat, and the aggressive twisting motion was creating forces that her grip strength alone could not counter indefinitely. She realized that she needed to change tactics quickly or risk losing her primary means of defense. Drawing on techniques she had learned during defensive training courses, Sarah shifted her strategy from trying to maintain a static grip to using her opponent's own momentum against him. When the man pulled hard on the rifle barrel, Sarah suddenly pushed in the same direction rather than resisting. This unexpected change caught him off balance and sent him stumbling backward several steps. The temporary separation gave Sarah enough room to bring her rifle back into a more controllable position. She quickly chambered another round and attempted to acquire a sight picture, but the man recovered his balance faster than she had anticipated. Before she could line up a shot, he was charging toward her again with renewed determination. This time, however, Sarah was better prepared for his assault. Instead of allowing him to crash into her position, she sidestepped at the last moment and used his momentum to send him tumbling past her defensive position. The fallen log that had initially provided concealment now became an obstacle that further disrupted his attack. He sprawled awkwardly across the weathered timber, momentarily stunned by the unexpected impact. Sarah seized this opportunity to create distance between herself and her attacker. She moved quickly to a position that placed the full length of the fallen log between them, while maintaining a clear field of fire. Her rifle was already loaded and ready, and she had learned from their first encounter not to hesitate if she had a clear shot opportunity. But once again, the man proved to be more resilient and resourceful than Sarah had expected. Instead of attempting to climb over the log where he would be completely exposed, he rolled beneath it and emerged on Sarah's side of the barrier before she could adjust her position. His tactical thinking might have been impaired, but his survival instincts were operating at full capacity. The second physical confrontation was even more intense than the first. This time, the man focused his efforts entirely on gaining control of Sarah's rifle. He grabbed the weapon with both hands and began applying a crushing grip that threatened to break her fingers if she did not release it. Sarah felt bones grinding together in her hands as the man squeezed with desperate strength. The pain was excruciating, but Sarah had endured similar sensations during her competitive shooting career. She had participated in matches where poor weather conditions had left her hands numb with cold, and had learned to maintain her grip and trigger control even when she could barely feel her fingers. The current situation was far more serious, but the mental discipline was similar. Rather than focusing on the pain, Sarah concentrated on maintaining her grip while looking for opportunities to improve her tactical position. The man's single-minded focus on the rifle meant that he was not paying attention to other aspects of their struggle. Sarah realized that she might be able to use this tunnel vision against him. While the stranger continued to twist and pull at her weapon, Sarah began working her way toward a more stable shooting stance. She knew that if she could create even a few seconds of separation, her superior marksmanship skills would end the confrontation immediately. The key was finding a way to break his grip without losing control of the rifle entirely. Sarah's solution came from an unexpected source. During her first winter in Montana, she had taken a wilderness survival course that included instruction on escaping from various types of physical restraints. One technique involved using sudden rotational movements to exploit the weakest point in an attacker's grip. Sarah had practiced the method extensively during the course, though she had never expected to use it in a life-or-death situation. Timing her movement to coincide with one of the man's pulling motions, Sarah suddenly twisted her rifle in a specific pattern that applied maximum leverage against his thumb joints. The technique worked exactly as taught, causing him to involuntarily release his grip with one hand as his thumb was forced backward beyond its normal range of motion. The partial release was enough to give Sarah the advantage she needed. She immediately pulled the rifle tight against her body and backed away while working the bolt action to chamber a fresh round. Her previous shot had gone wild during their initial collision, but she now had a loaded weapon and sufficient distance to use it effectively. The man realized that his tactical situation had deteriorated significantly. Sarah was no longer within his immediate reach, and she had regained full control of her rifle. He could see her working the bolt action and understood that he had only seconds before she would be ready to fire. His options were rapidly diminishing. In desperation, the stranger made one final attempt to close the distance before Sarah could complete her preparations. He launched himself toward her in a diving tackle that was intended to bring them both to the ground where his size advantage would be most effective. It was a high-risk strategy that would either succeed completely or leave him completely exposed to defensive fire. Sarah saw the attack coming and had enough time to make a critical decision about how to respond. She could attempt to sidestep again and try to maintain distance, but the man's approach angle made this difficult. Alternatively, she could stand her ground and accept the physical contact while trusting in her ability to maintain control of her weapon during close combat. Sarah chose a third option that drew on both her shooting skills and her engineering training. Instead of trying to avoid the collision entirely, she timed her movement to ensure that she would be in the strongest possible position when contact occurred. She braced herself against a large boulder that provided solid support and brought her rifle to bear at the exact moment her attacker reached maximum vulnerability. The man was completely committed to his diving attack, and could not change direction or speed as he closed the final few feet. Sarah had positioned herself so that he would impact her at an angle that minimized his advantage while maximizing her ability to maintain weapon control. More importantly, she had ensured that her rifle would be pointed directly at center mass when he reached point-blank range. Their final collision was brief but decisive. The man's momentum carried him directly into Sarah's prepared position, but instead of overwhelming her defenses, he found himself facing the business end of a loaded rifle held by someone who had trained extensively for exactly this type of situation. Sarah had absorbed the impact while maintaining her grip and sight alignment, putting her in position to end the confrontation on her terms. But even as Sarah prepared to fire the shot that would stop her attacker permanently, she faced another split-second decision that would test her judgment under extreme pressure. The man was now so close that any shot would be fatal at point-blank range. She needed to determine whether the level of threat still justified the use of deadly force, or whether the changed circumstances provided an opportunity to end the situation with less drastic measures. Sarah's competitive shooting experience had taught her to make rapid decisions under pressure, but this situation was unlike any match she had ever entered. The consequences of her next action would extend far beyond winning or losing a competition. She was about to discover whether years of training and preparation had truly prepared her for the moment when everything depended on her ability to deliver accurate shots under the most stressful conditions imaginable. The man's hands reached for her rifle one more time, his fingers closing around the barrel in a final desperate attempt to prevent her from using the weapon. But this time, Sarah was ready for his technique. She had learned from their previous struggles and had positioned herself to maintain maximum control regardless of his actions. The crushing grip that had been so effective earlier now served only to ensure that he could not escape the consequences of his choices. Sarah felt the familiar pressure of the trigger against her finger as she prepared to end the most dangerous encounter of her life. 7 rounds remained in her magazine, more than enough to ensure her survival if she could overcome the physical struggle for control of her weapon. The next few seconds would determine whether her years of training had been sufficient preparation for a test she had hoped never to face. As the man's hands closed around her rifle barrel for what would prove to be the final time, Sarah experienced a moment of crystalline clarity that seemed to slow time itself. Every aspect of her training converged into perfect focus as her body and mind automatically executed the techniques she had practiced thousands of times. The chaos and fear of the struggle fell away, replaced by the calm precision that had made her one of the most accurate shooters in the state. Sarah's grip on her rifle had been tested beyond anything she had experienced in competition, but her hands remained steady and sure. The countless hours spent building finger strength and grip endurance were paying dividends in ways she had never anticipated. While her attacker strained to wrench the weapon away, Sarah maintained complete control with an iron grip that seemed welded to the rifle's stock. The man's desperation was evident in his increasingly frantic attempts to gain control of the weapon. He pulled and twisted with all his remaining strength, but Sarah's defensive position behind the boulder provided her with leverage advantages that negated his superior size. More importantly, his focus on the rifle left him completely exposed to the precise application of defensive force that Sarah had trained to deliver. In one fluid motion that combined elements from years of competitive shooting and defensive training, Sarah broke the man's grip using a technique that applied maximum force to the weakest point of his hold. Her movement was so quick and decisive that he barely had time to register what was happening before he found himself completely separated from the weapon that represented his only hope of controlling the situation. The sudden loss of contact with the rifle sent the man stumbling backward, off balance, and vulnerable. Sarah immediately took advantage of this opening by establishing a perfect shooting stance that drew on muscle memory developed through thousands of repetitions. Her feet found their proper positions automatically, her body weight distributed for maximum stability, her rifle brought to her shoulder with textbook precision. Through her scope, Sarah could see the man attempting to recover his balance, and launch another desperate attack. But she had gained the tactical advantage she needed, and her superior training was about to demonstrate its value in the most definitive way possible. The distance between them was now ideal for accurate shooting, close enough to ensure perfect shot placement, but far enough to prevent another physical struggle. Sarah's first deliberate shot was a textbook example of precision marksmanship under extreme pressure. Her crosshairs settled naturally on the center of the man's chest as her breathing automatically shifted to the controlled pattern she had practiced countless times. The trigger broke cleanly at exactly the pressure she expected, and the rifle's recoil was absorbed smoothly by her practiced shooting stance. The .308 Winchester cartridge struck with devastating effect, the heavy bullet transferring its energy precisely as designed. The man's forward momentum was instantly halted as the impact spun him partially around. But Sarah's training had taught her that single shots, even well-placed ones, did not always immediately incapacitate determined attackers. She was already cycling the bolt action and acquiring her second sight picture before the first shot had fully completed its work. Her second shot came less than 2 seconds after the first. Another perfectly placed round that demonstrated the value of her countless hours of practice. Sarah's ability to work the bolt action smoothly while maintaining sight alignment had been developed through years of competitive shooting, where rapid follow-up shots often determine the difference between winning and losing. Now those same skills were being applied in defense of her life. The man was clearly affected by the first 2 impacts, but his drug-impaired nervous system was still driving him forward with unnatural determination. Sarah recognized the signs from stories shared by law enforcement friends who had dealt with similar situations. Some attackers could absorb tremendous damage while still posing a threat, making it essential to continue engaging until the danger was completely neutralized. Sarah's third shot was delivered with the same mechanical precision as the first 2. Her shooting had entered a zone of pure automatism where conscious thought was unnecessary. Years of training had programmed her muscle memory so thoroughly that her body was executing a perfect defensive shooting sequence without any input from her conscious mind. The bolt worked smoothly, the crosshairs found their target, the trigger broke cleanly. By the fourth shot, the cumulative effect of multiple hits was finally overcoming the man's chemical-enhanced aggression. His movements became unsteady and his attacks less coordinated, but Sarah's training emphasized engaging threats until they were completely incapacitated. She had learned from experienced instructors that stopping too soon could allow a wounded attacker to recover and pose continued danger. The fifth shot continued Sarah's demonstration of surgical precision under the most extreme pressure imaginable. Each round had been placed with the same accuracy she typically achieved during practice sessions at the range. The stress of mortal combat had not degraded her shooting performance in the slightest, testament to the thoroughness of her training and the depth of her skill development. Sarah's sixth shot came as the man finally began to collapse from the accumulated damage. Her marksmanship had been so precise that each bullet had struck within inches of the others, creating a tight group that would have earned perfect scores in any competitive match. But this was not a competition, and Sarah continued to engage as long as any potential threat remained. The seventh and final shot was delivered with the same careful precision as the previous 6. Sarah's rifle was now empty, but the threat had been completely neutralized through her systematic application of defensive firepower. 7 shots, 7 hits, all placed with the accuracy of someone who had spent years perfecting her craft and developing the mental discipline necessary to perform under ultimate pressure. As the echoes of the final shot faded across the Montana wilderness, Sarah maintained her shooting position for several more seconds. Her training had taught her to continue observing potential threats until she was certain the danger had passed completely. Only when she was satisfied that the man posed no further risk did she lower her rifle and begin to process what had just occurred. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 10 minutes from start to finish, but Sarah felt as though she had aged years in that brief span. Her hands were shaking slightly now that the adrenaline was beginning to subside, but her grip on the rifle remained sure. She automatically engaged the weapon's safety and pointed the muzzle in a safe direction, her training continuing to guide her actions even as her conscious mind struggled to absorb the magnitude of what she had just experienced. Sarah's first priority was ensuring her own safety and securing the area. She knew that she needed to contact law enforcement immediately to report the incident, but first she wanted to confirm that the man posed no further threat and check for any accomplices who might be in the vicinity. Her engineering training served her well as she systematically evaluated the situation and planned her next actions. The man's body lay motionless approximately 20 yards from her position, testament to the effectiveness of her defensive shooting. Sarah approached carefully while keeping her rifle ready, though she was confident that 7 well-placed .308 rounds had ended any possibility of continued resistance. Her shot placement had been precise enough to ensure rapid incapacitation while avoiding the kind of excessive force that might raise legal questions later. Sarah's competitive shooting background had taught her to analyze her performance objectively, and even in this traumatic situation, part of her mind was evaluating how her training had held up under ultimate pressure. She was somewhat amazed to realize that her shooting had actually been better than her typical range performance. The life-or-death stakes had apparently focused her concentration to an even higher level than she achieved during competitions. Once she was satisfied that the immediate threat had been neutralized, Sarah used her cell phone to contact emergency services. Her call was calm and professional despite the circumstances, providing dispatchers with precise location information and a clear description of what had occurred. Her engineering training had taught her to communicate technical information clearly under pressure, skills that served her well during this critical conversation. The nearest law enforcement was more than an hour away, given the remote location, but Sarah was content to wait in place for their arrival. She had no desire to leave the scene or complicate the legal aspects of what would clearly be a justified shooting. Her defensive training had included instruction on the legal aftermath of armed self-defense, and she understood the importance of cooperating fully with the investigation. While waiting for authorities to arrive, Sarah took time to document the scene and organize her thoughts about the sequence of events. She knew that she would need to provide detailed statements about every aspect of the confrontation, and her engineering background had taught her the value of systematic record-keeping. She photographed the scene from multiple angles and made notes about the timing and circumstances of each shot. Sarah also used the waiting time to contact her family and inform them of what had happened. Her parents were shocked and concerned, but also proud of how their daughter had handled such a dangerous situation. Her grandfather, now in his 80s, was particularly gratified to learn that the shooting lessons he had provided years earlier had ultimately saved Sarah's life when she needed them most. When the first sheriff's deputy finally arrived, he found Sarah waiting calmly with her rifle unloaded and secured. Her cooperation and professionalism immediately impressed the investigating officers, who recognized that they were dealing with someone who understood both firearms and legal procedures. The preliminary investigation confirmed that Sarah's account of the incident was consistent with the physical evidence at the scene. The man's identity was eventually established through fingerprints and outstanding warrants. He turned out to be a violent criminal with a long history of assault and drug-related offenses who had been living rough in the wilderness while evading law enforcement. His blood showed evidence of methamphetamine use, which explained his erratic behavior and unusual resistance to the gunshot wounds. The official investigation took several weeks to complete, but the conclusion was never in doubt. The shooting was ruled completely justified, with investigators praising Sarah's restraint in attempting to resolve the situation peacefully before resorting to defensive force. Her 7 shots were characterized as reasonable and necessary given the circumstances she faced. Sarah's story eventually became well known within the shooting community, both as an example of excellent marksmanship under pressure and as validation of the importance of serious defensive training. She was invited to speak at numerous events about her experience, sharing lessons that could help other shooters prepare for similar situations. The incident had a profound impact on Sarah's life and perspective. While she continued to enjoy competitive shooting, she gained a much deeper appreciation for the serious responsibilities that came with carrying firearms. She increased her involvement in training programs that taught defensive shooting skills, wanting to help others develop the capabilities that had saved her life. Sarah also became an advocate for women's participation in shooting sports and self-defense training. Her experience demonstrated that physical size and strength were not the determining factors in armed confrontations. Superior training, mental preparation, and the will to defend oneself could overcome significant physical disadvantages when applied with precision and determination. Years later, Sarah still lived on her property outside Billings and continued to hunt in the same wilderness areas where her life had nearly ended. But she never forgot the lessons learned during those terrifying minutes when her survival depended entirely on her ability to deliver 7 perfect shots under the most extreme pressure imaginable. The experience had proven that her grandfather's lessons about self-reliance and preparedness were more than just philosophy. They were practical life skills that could mean the difference between becoming a victim and going home safely. The rifle that had served her so well during the confrontation eventually found a place of honor above her fireplace, though Sarah continued to use it regularly for both hunting and competition. 7 carefully placed shots had not only saved her life, but had validated years of dedicated training and preparation. The weapon served as a daily reminder that the skills she had worked so hard to develop could prove invaluable when everything was on the line.